Welcome to Movie Caps. Today I will show you a drama, biography, crime film from 2002, titled Catch Me If You Can. Spoilers ahead. Watch out and take care. An FBI agent, Carl Henratty, is speaking to the French police telling them he has orders to see a man named Frank Abagnale. He is taken to a jail cell and told to stay put in his seat, not to open the door or pass the prisoner anything. A sick man is sitting in the jail cell, coughing loudly. The agent tells him he is here to read in the articles of extradition according to the European Court for Human Rights. As he is reading the first article, the prisoner asks him for help. He ignores him and continues reading until the prisoner collapses and the agent yells for a doctor. He is taken to the medical ward. The agent is concerned about how the prisoner needs a doctor and needs to be on a flight to America. Meanwhile, the prisoner disappears. The crowd in the jail riles up and cheers as the prisoner tries to make a run for it. He is eventually caught by the police as he lies helplessly on the ground. 6 years ago at the New Rochelle Rotary Club, in 1963, Frank William Abagnale Sr. is declared a lifetime member of the club by his friend, Jack Barnes. Frank Sr. gives a speech and mentions a story about two mice falling into a bucket of cream. One mouse drowned and died, while the other worked hard and churned the cream into butter, thus making it out alive. At home, his son Frank Jr. dances with his mother as his father lovingly tells him the story of how he met his wife. The parents dance as Frank Jr. watches them joyfully. Frank Sr. comes and wakes his son up for an important meeting. They head out to get a suit. He lies to a woman about his father dying, saying he needs a suit for his son for a military funeral. He pulls out a necklace from his pocket out of the blue and tells her it must have slipped off her neck. Frank Jr. parks the car. His father tells him to hold the door, wait for him and not to go anywhere. He says that the reason the Yankees always win is because everyone can't help looking at the pinstripes. Frank Sr. goes to Chase Manhattan Bank asking for a loan. He is told he can't be accommodated due to having unresolved business with the IRS and being involved in government tax fraud. He mentions his accolades but they don't help him much. The family is forced to sell their car and house and move into an apartment. After coming home one day, Frank Sr. sees his son making pancakes and asks where his mother is. She went looking for a job. His father says he won't have pancakes on his 16th birthday, telling him he put $25 for him in the bank. He hands his son a checkbook. He flips through the checks happily, eyes glittering. Frank Jr. goes to school in uniform and gets bullied. The bully says he looks like a substitute teacher and Frank just rolls with it. He decides to pose as one, doing an amazing impersonation, making his bully read French out loud, embarrassing him. When the actual substitute shows up, he convinces even her. Apparently this went on for a week before the school figured it out. His parents were called and informed of their son's shenanigans. He even held a teacher-parent conference and planned a class field trip. Frank is sitting outside and helps a girl make her note for a doctor's appointment look more legitimate by telling her to crease it. One day Frank comes home and catches his mother with Jack Barnes, his father's friend. He feels something is off. His mother convinces him that it's nothing and asks him not to tell his father about this interaction. She tells him she's going out and gives him money. Later, Frank is told about his parents' separation. He needs to make the decision regarding who he'll live with. He is visibly upset and runs away. Back in Paris, 1969, Frank asks the agent when he'll be able to call his father. He is told he can call his father when they reach New York. He initially complains about the room they're staying in, which is the best the FBI can afford, and later concedes, saying he has lived in worse situations, being reminded of the time he was kicked out of a hotel because his checks weren't authentic, for which he blamed the bank. The owner didn't trust him and kicked him out. Frank makes handmade fraudulent checks. He continuously lies to people and convinces them to cash his checks, but they refuse repeatedly. He sees a pilot and stewardesses in New York, thus getting inspired to become a pilot. He writes to his father talking about applying to different airlines in hopes of getting acceptance. His father now owns a stationery store. He disguises himself as a high schooler and takes an interview of an actual pilot, getting information about his line of work. The man tells him about two important things a pilot needs: an airline personnel badge and an FAA license. He shows him his license. Frank asks if he can get a copy to put in his article, and the pilot agrees. He asks if he can have his ID too, but the man tells him he can only be given an ID if he is an actual pilot. Frank changes his voice and calls from a telephone booth, posing as a Pan American co-pilot from San Francisco asking for a new uniform, because his old one got lost. He is directed to a uniform company where he is told to simply provide his employee ID number and the amount for his new uniform would be cut from his next paycheck. He writes to his father, telling him how he's trying to not be afraid. He apologizes for running away and tells him he'll get everything they lost back. He walks in his pilot uniform. People look at him with admiration and he basks in glory. He stays at a hotel where he fakes a payroll check for $300. He gets accepted into the training program and starts to collect toy airplanes of Pan American Airways, using the sticker of the logo, pasting it on the checks, making them look legitimate. He uses the checks to his advantage and distracts people with his charisma, making them incapable of noticing the tricks up his sleeve. He learns about cashing checks at the airport and poses as a deadhead despite not actually knowing what it is, and gets a jump seat in an airplane. He writes to his father telling him he has graduated and is earning handsomely. He tells him his family can fly for free and he's taking his parents to Hawaii for Christmas. He plays the necklace trick he learnt from his father on a stewardess and fools around with her. He charms a woman working behind a counter and lures her into telling him about how a Micker machine works and gets information about routing numbers. Later, Frank buys his own Micker machine. FBI agent Carl Hanratty talks about how Frank changes the Micker routing number at the bottom of the checks and has created several checking accounts, calling his check fraud the float. He explains how Frank makes his checks circle around the country, without the banks noticing his activities, but is not taken seriously by the rest of the officers. Frank takes his father to a fancy restaurant and tells him he bought him a Cadillac. His father tells him he can't drive in a new car when the IRS is on his back. He says he took the train to meet him and he'll take the train on his way back. He reminds his son that he is the second mouse, meaning he works hard to be where he is. He mentions closing his stationery store before the authorities could forcefully shut it down. He tells his son that he's fighting for his wife. He toasts to Frank and boosts his confidence. Frank tells him he's going to Hollywood. Agent Carl Hanratty is driving with his colleagues, looking disinterested, as they act ridiculously. He tells them an offensive joke. Hanratty goes to a motel and finds out Frank is there. He bursts into his room and finds him. Frank turns the situation around by posing as a Secret Service agent named Barry Allen, who is also searching for Frank William Abagnale. Carl still isn't convinced and asks for identification, so Frank casually gives him his wallet. He then tells Carl to sit tight while he gets the evidence downstairs and leaves. Frank purposely leaves his wallet with Carl, telling him he trusts him. After a bit of thinking, Carl actually opens his wallet and finds that it's full of labels and realizes that he has been fooled. Carl assures his team that he now knows Frank's face and voice, which will be helpful in their search for him. He is told not to get himself humiliated anymore. Frank still poses as a high schooler to get more answers from the pilot and finds out about the Skyway Man, who poses as a pilot and flies around the country. There's a story about him in the paper where he is called the James Bond of the sky. Feeling proud of being a sensation, he spends money on buying James Bond suits and gets an expensive car. He meets a model named Cheryl and ends up making her an offer of $1,000 to spend the night with him. Meanwhile, Carl feels frustrated at the laundromat. Carl is working late on Christmas Eve. He receives a call from Frank, who honestly tells him his location, but Carl refuses to believe him. He taunts Carl, who in return assures him he'll get caught sooner or later. He makes Frank realize that he has nobody to call on Christmas Eve. At a cafe, Carl finds out that Barry Allen is actually a comic book character called The Flash. He realizes Frank is a kid who lives in New York. The FBI visits Frank's mother, who married Jack Barnes. She dismisses his crimes. Upon being asked, she shows them a yearbook picture of Frank, which Carl instantly recognizes. He tells her that her son is forging checks. She asks for the total amount, saying she'll pay it back. He tells her it is $1.3 million. Carl also meets Frank's father, who defends his son when Carl mentions his wrongdoings. Frank leads a deceptive life as a posh resident of Atlanta, Georgia. He meets a girl named Brenda in a hospital and chooses to become a doctor, faking a Harvard education. He watches medical films to learn more about his new line of work. He gets physical with Brenda but is interrupted when he is called to check out a kid who got hurt in a bicycle accident. He behaves awkwardly and barely makes it through as he feels uncomfortable looking at the kid's wounds. One day Brenda tells Frank that she had a pregnancy cancellation 2 years ago, after which her parents kicked her out. Frank suggests getting engaged and winning back her parents' love. When Frank meets Brenda's family, he is asked to say grace at the dinner table. He uses the same story about the 2 mice. He manages to lie to her parents that he's also a lawyer from Berkeley. Carl and the FBI reach the hospital and find Frank's belongings. Frank wins Brenda's father's trust and decides to get married to her. He takes the bar exam in Louisiana. Carl asks him how he passed the exam. He asks for half of Carl's eclair in exchange for the answer, but Carl declines the offer. Frank gets his own desk at work and begins to watch law films for inspiration. At his preliminary hearing he overacts and the judge questions what is wrong with him. He spends time with Brenda's family and longingly stares at her parents as they dance together. Frank meets his father, who mentions taking up a government job and wanting to sue the IRS. Frank mentions settling down. He says he'll get back all that was taken from him. He tries to convince his father about how they'll attend the wedding with his mother. His father tells him that she married his friend Jack Barnes. He also mentions that an FBI agent came looking for Frank. He says he wants to stop, and asks his father to tell him to stop, but he simply doesn't tell him that. Frank calls Carl again on Christmas Eve, indicating he wants to stop as he is getting engaged. He says he stole almost $4 million, and he won't get away with it that easily. There can be no truce, only prison for him. Frank tells him to stop chasing after him. Carl is confident that Frank isn't in the position to change his name again, so he starts looking for engagement announcements in Louisiana's newspapers. At the engagement party, Carl shows up. Frank panics. He blurts out everything to Brenda and instructs her to meet him at Miami International Airport in 2 days. Before he leaves, Brenda asks him his full name and he honestly tells her. Carl finds his way into the bedroom and finds a strung-out Brenda. Brenda comes to the airport. Frank sees her and starts to notice people around him everywhere. He gets paranoid and drives off. The FBI assumes he could have been tipped and talks about wanting to catch him before he leaves the country, though he is perfectly capable of getting himself a fake passport. Frank pulls another fake persona and lies to universities on the phone about Pan American Airways recruiting new staff members. He visits the campus and picks out 8 young women to accompany him on a European tour in which they'll learn all about being a stewardess. Frank walks into Miami International Airport surrounded by stunning stewardesses who serve as the best distraction from authorities noticing him. He cunningly fools Hanratty. 7 months later, the FBI discusses the impeccable and carefully crafted nature of Frank's checks. The blame of not being able to catch Frank is pinned on Carl. Carl digs deeper, searching for the reason behind the flawlessness of Frank's checks. He realizes they are printed in France and goes to Montrichard, where he meets Frank. Printing presses are present, as a deranged Frank is in sight. Carl tries to arrest him and tells him that he has the authorities with him. Frank says he's lying and he's working alone. Carl warns him that as soon as he heads out, he'll be killed. He puts on the handcuffs in defeat. The French police arrive and take Frank with them. Carl tells him that he'll have him extradited to the US. Later, during the flight, Frank reminds Carl that he has to call his father as soon as they land. He is told that his father is dead. He doesn't take the news too well, and breaks down in the bathroom, from where he tries to escape through the wheels of the airplane. He runs off to his mother's house and sees a little girl, realizing that his mother has another kid. She has a family of her own. The police eventually arrest him and he is given a sentence of 12 years in total isolation. Carl meets Frank at the phone booth in the prison. He helps Carl in catching a criminal he's been searching for. He gets a job at the FBI's financial crime unit. Frank is out when he sees a pilot's uniform and gets tempted. He asks about Carl's weekend plans. He mentions plans to visit his daughter. Frank doesn't know what to do for the weekend. He looks at his mugshot with "captured" written on it and tears the picture off. He dresses up as a pilot and is walking away as Carl follows behind him. He again asks Frank how he managed to pass the bar exam. He tells Frank that he'll be seriously punished if he messes up, reminding him that he convinced the authorities for 4 years that he wouldn't run off again. He admits to Frank that his daughter is actually 15, she was 4 when he separated from his wife, and that his plan was cancelled because she was skiing on the weekend. He tells him sometimes it's easier to live a lie. He knows he'll come back to work on Monday because this time, nobody's chasing after him. Carl is at work feeling doubtful about Frank coming back. He comes back and mentions that he actually studied for 2 weeks and passed the bar exam legitimately. Frank ended up living an honest life, helping the FBI catch check forgers as well as using his expertise to design new secure standards for big companies and banks. He got married, had 3 kids and stayed close friends with Carl. The end. Thank you for watching. Subscribe if you'd like to see more videos like this.